Here they come, it's the Flying V! He shoots, now that's it.
Dude, are you reenacting the last scene of the Mighty Ducks?
How long you been standing there?
Like a couple seconds?
No. Hey guys, welcome to Gear Tasting. I know I promised you on this episode that we walk through our new discreet messenger bag, but we actually produced a whole video walking through that completely. So rather than take up a bunch of time on Gear Tasting, I will direct you to the description below in the YouTube video and tell you to check out that link for the full video. So today I'd like to go into first some more products that we got in from Hoptic. The guy from Hoptic actually checked out the video of our previous Gear Tasting where I went through installing one of the Hoptic plates on the bottom. This is a +1 plate for my Glock 43. You might have seen this on the previous Gear Tasting. So what he sent over was, because I said I liked the Pierce grip plate that was on one of my other mags, because it had a bigger pinky extension basically on the end, he sent me over this, which he dubbed the Porcupine. So this is just like the +1 extension, and I'm looking forward to putting this on, but I just want to show you guys the difference between the two. So this +1 extension not only adds kind of a bigger ramp for your pinky to rest on for a more comfortable grip, at least in my case, but it also kind of, I think, serves as a little bit of an impact device too if you had to bluntly hit something with your pistol. So at any rate, that's the Porcupine from Hoptic. Again, it gives you a +1 in the mag, so instead of being a 6-round mag like the standard Glock 43 mag, it adds +1, so you got 7, potentially 8 with one in the chamber on the Glock 43. Again, actually another couple of products he sent over to check out too is their quiver. So this is basically a 2-round capacity device that fits on the side of a key mod rail. They also, I think, have them coming for a Picatinny rail too, but what it does is gives you the ability to store 2 extra rounds. This happens to be the 30 cal version. So these are 2 .308 bullets. This is the 175 grain Sierra Match King that I shoot when I do long range stuff. So what I really like about this is not only the lightweight aspect of this. I've never really thought that you needed to have extra rounds kind of ready. You know how Magpul, if you're familiar with Magpul devices, they had a insert for the bottom of one of their grips, so you could store an extra round or 2. I think it was an extra 3 rounds or something like that in the bottom of the grip plate. I never really used that. I had like the extra bolt and firing pin. I think I have that insert for the bottom of the Magpul grip. I can never remember what the name of that grip is, but at any rate, I've never really carried extra rounds, but I like the concept of this just because, especially in long range shooting, there's always instances where you may dump a mag of 10 rounds, which doesn't sound like a lot, but in long range shooting it's a lot of rounds. So the ability to have an extra 2 rounds right there where you can actually just manually load into a bolt action gun would actually be pretty cool upgrade. But again, this is for key mod, like the 308 that I've shown on Gear Tasting before that I shot. Doesn't have a spot to mount this, but anyway, interesting device, and it comes with these O-rings that once you actually secure this to the key mod, you kind of take this O-ring around and loop it around the rounds here like so, and actually secures those from falling out too. But I actually like the nylon inserts, so it's really going to be hard to see, but there's nylon inserts in each one of these, so it's not just the machined aluminum that you're putting the bullet into, you're actually sliding it into a nylon sleeve, and then there's a red, looks like an eraser almost, something like that in the end of each one of these that the bullet tip is actually pushing into, so it's not just pressing against metal. So it actually has a really nice fit. It slides in there pretty well and retains even without that O-ring. So, and then the other thing he sent over was a couple of pen tubes. So these pen tubes are something that TAD Gear came out with a long time ago, but he has taken a different approach to the pen tube. So instead of just being, I guess with the TAD versions, I never owned any of those, so I'm not really too familiar with them, but you know, you'd stick them on your shirt sleeve, on your Velcro, and then you could put your pen inside of it. But this one also has loop on the top so that it doesn't, you don't wind up sacrificing a portion of your loop on your sleeve, so you can actually still put stuff on top of it. So again, you just take a pen, put it into the pen sleeve like so, and then that would get retained on your shirt sleeve or something like that. So a couple pen tubes available, I guess multicam. This looks like a khaki or a tan, and you've got Ranger green and a black. So again, all available from Hoptic, and I appreciate them sending over that stuff for you guys to check out. All right, guys, so the next thing I want to highlight on gear tasting is kind of a shameless self-promotion a little bit, but we carry the visible lock trainers because we strongly believe in this as a product. These are a little bit different from anything we've kind of seen out there. These are made to be able to rest flat on a tabletop, some of the ones we've carried before, and some of the ones that I kind of, I guess, got into lock sport on and used when I was first starting this many years ago. We're very similar to this, and this is one of the best ways to learn, and whether you even buy one of these from us or somewhere else, I will always advocate this being one of the primary ways to learn how a lock works. So I wanted to briefly kind of walk you through how a lock works in hopes that you kind of gain some interest from this, and maybe it kind of leads to you exploring lock sport a little more, and whether you pick up some picks and training accessories from ITS or not, it doesn't matter to me, honestly. I think it's just a phenomenal thing for everybody to learn and to know how to actually manipulate a lock, because in my view, that learning how a lock works will help you realize what kind of security you have on your own home and what's good and how you can upgrade your own security where you live. So that being said, the way a lock works is, and this is a standard pin and tumbler lock, and what that means is that a tumbler, or the actual keyway like this, is what turns when you have the properly inserted key in, and I don't have the right keys, sorry about that. Other set of keys here. All right, so when you have the proper key, the actual cylinder or tumbler turns when the proper key is inserted. So that's, pins come from the top, tumbler being the actual cylinder that the key is actually moving into. So that's pin and tumbler. So the lock is made up of top pins, which are called the driving pins, which are here, and those are set and pressed down on with these springs. So in each of these channels in a lock, and this is basically a clear representation of a lock cylinder, those springs are actually pushing tension down against the cylinder. So what's happening is that as these top driver pins are pressed into the smaller key pins, which you can see here, it causes the shear line. So this is a shear line here. So the lock that's turning here is actually turning because the pins are aligned on what's called a shear line. So those top pins are in the correct position to where the bottom pins align just on that shear line, and it turns. So I don't know if you can see that, but those bottom pins are actually trapped by the cylinder as it turns. So as the key is manipulated in the lock, top pins stay on the top, driver pins, that is, stay on the top. Key pins go with the cylinder and actually turn. So when you get your lock rekeyed and the locksmith comes out and rekeys your lock, all that's changing on that lock are these small little key pins at the bottom. So those key pins match the profile of the cuts in the key. So if you look at a key like this, you can actually count how many pins are in a key by just looking at it and looking at the profile. So in this, there's 5 pins. You can see that there's 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Every time there's a valley within the key, that's where a pin is actually interacting with that key, hopefully that makes sense. So what you're trying to do when you manipulate the lock or when you pick it is you're trying to align that key pin right across the shear line. So you're trying to bump that pin or the pin stack, because everything's moving as a single unit. So every time you press up on that key pin, it's moving the driver pin on top and using the spring tension to hold it in place. So what you're trying to do is mimic the key being turned at the same time you're trying to manipulate each pin stack. So as you come in here with a lock pick, this is a tension wrench and pick from our Bogota pie set. So as you're manipulating the lock, you're holding tension, and it's a very slight tension. It's almost like a featherweight tension that's being applied. as you're manipulating. You can either rake a lock, which is done with something like this, which every time you have a hump, it's supposed to simulate a key, and you're basically moving that in and out of the lock like so, and you're trying to simulate kind of a quick pick of the lock when you're trying to rake. But for this demonstration, I'm going to use a single pin pick technique to kind of show what's going on. So as I'm applying tension, I'm going to manipulate each of the pin stacks. So every time the pin stack moves, and I apologize if this is a little hard to see on camera, but every time the pin stack moves, I'm kind of backing off the tension a little bit, and I'm kind of feeling what the lock's doing. So what that cylinder is actually doing inside of there as I'm manipulating the pin stacks. But the idea is to manipulate a pin stack and get it to the correct point to which the cylinder is going to turn a little bit. You'll feel a little bit of movement on the cylinder, so you'll know that you've gotten a couple of pins, so to speak. So as you manipulate each of the pin stacks, you're just moving on to the next pin stack that's producing tension on the lock. So you're basically going back to find the stuck pin stack in a sense. So on this, I'm just looking at the same time I'm doing it, because this is the best way to learn, is to actually visually look at the lock until you actually turn it. So I got the lock on that one, and you can see it's now spinning freely. But what I did is I just kind of went in and I watched the pin stacks, and I'm watching that shear line. So as you're manipulating it with a visible trainer like this, you can actually see what's going on in each of the pin stacks, and you can physically see that shear line. So that's why I say it's a really great way to learn, because you can see what each of the pin stacks is doing as you're either single pin picking. It's a little bit harder with a rake, because really a rake is just kind of a no holds barred way of picking the lock. So kind of a brute force attack, if you will. So again, you've got driving pins, you got key pins, and you've got a keyway. This is the key profile matching the cylinder. And again, the shear line is the most important part of manipulating a lock. So again, that's what all raking a lock is too. It's just kind of a fast movement that causes the pin stacks to jump. And then one other thing is we offer 3 different styles of lock trainers. So we either have standard driver pins, which is like this. It's just, and that's one thing I don't know if I covered this or not, but I'm going to say it again. The driver pins are all the same size, so these pins don't change. These are all the same size in the top here. It's only the key pins that change profile. So again, when you're rekeying the lock, that's what changes to match the key profile, or vice versa. You can actually key a lock to match a key profile rather than key pins to produce a new key. So there's 3 different styles. One is a standard driver pin, then the other is a serrated driver pin, and the other is a spool driver pin. So the difference between those 3 is serrated pins and spool pins are more what's referred to as a security pin. So when you buy security locks, and I'm not talking about the really high-end stuff like Medco and Multi-Lock, those are completely different things, and that's really where I'd push you if you were actually looking for security locks. I'd push you into those 2 brands. But standard Schlage and Kwikset and things like that you'll find at the hardware store sometimes are marketed as security locks, and what they do is they just put a different type of driver pin in there. So what happens is, as you're manipulating each pin stack, or as a person that's nefarious and picking locks for the wrong reason, which you should always have permission to pick locks, and that's what lock sport's all about, so make sure you look into that as well. This is not trying to teach you anything that's illegal. Lock sport's perfectly legal to practice on your own. So anyway, as you're manipulating each pin stack, what happens with a spool pin or a serrated pin is you'll produce what's called a false set. So you'll feel as though the cylinder turned a little bit to produce that pin, and you feel like it's set at the right height across the shear line, but in reality what's happened is that it's binding right on that. So if you picture an hourglass, that cylinder is actually trapped on the midpoint of that hourglass shape, and it's binding on that. So that's what's referred to as a security pin. So just wanted to cover that. Hopefully this is a good intro for you if you're not familiar with lock sport, not familiar with picking locks. Make sure you leave any questions in the comments. I'll be sure to answer them. All right, and now for the most dangerous questions over coffee that we've done. I'm going to try my best not to cut myself. So the first question is from Sean M. on YouTube, who said, I'd love an all knives episode, especially higher end knives. I've recently gotten into autos. Any input? So I thought this would be a good opportunity to not only kind of dig through my collection and pull out some stuff that answers your question, but I've really always wanted to get into an explanation of some of the history behind some of the knives I have, because I'm kind of a history buff when it comes to knives in general. I like the history behind them as well. So I don't just collect them to have a box full of knives. At some point in my life, I thought I was going to use a lot of these. I never made it through the complete seal pipeline, as most of you guys know of. Got through Hell Week and Pool Comp and some of the harder stuff, but never graduated, never got to stab anybody and get a knife kill. So that's what I had thought that I was going to do, but plans changed and shit happens, and here we are talking about knives and gear tasting. So what I want to do first is talk about a little bit of the progression of from the seal knife trial. So if you're not familiar with that, I'm actually printed them out so I could talk through some points here. Research it online if you want. There's a guy named Hilton Yam, and I think I'm pronouncing his name right, but he was a Mad Dog knives dealer back in 1992. Yes, so this was conducted in April of 92 is when the seal knife trials happened. And I remember kind of growing up reading about this in a knife magazine, I think, a long time ago. So what happened is the SEALs fielded a trial, I think it was Group 1, so Naval Special Warfare Group 1. That's out of the California side. So you got West Coast and East Coast. That represents the West Coast teams. So they held the seal knife trial, and they used a couple of different knives that were kind of the hot shit on the market at the time, put them through a series of tests, and one came out the winner, which was the Mad Dog Attack 2, which is one of these right here. So as far as I know, Kevin McClung that owns Mad Dog, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, and I've actually met him in person, so apologize, Kevin, if I'm doing that wrong. But this is a knife I purchased before I even went into the Navy because I was just infatuated with the seal knife trials. I really loved the what this knife was capable of and the result of the trial, so that's why I actually bought one before I went in. Like I said, I really hoped to have used it one day, but when I got it and realized how freaking massive it was, and as I started going through buds, I remember thinking back to the knife that I had in the safe back in Texas when I was in California, thinking, it's a pretty large knife. I don't know if I'm really going to carry that on my belt or not, but at any rate, the Mad Dog Attack 2 came out the winner in the knife trial. So I wanted to just read through a couple of not only notes on the knives that were used during the trials, and I have some of the knives that are similar to what was used, but I also wanted to talk about all the criteria too, because it's pretty interesting to learn about. So the knife tests included 5 cuts on 10 kinds of rope, 550 paracord, 3/8" braided poly rope, 1/2" twisted poly rope, 1/4" sand sash cord, 5/16 braided poly rope, 5/8 nylon dock line, manila rope, 1/2" climbing rope, 4 sections of bundles, 3/8" manila rope for 1.5 inches total thickness. And granted, now all these were done without resharpening the knife. This was, complete cuts, continuous stuff like that. 5 cuts of 1/2" shielded cable, 2 cuts of 1 1/4" nylon webbing, 1 cut on GI canvas web belt, 2 cuts of nylon reinforced PVC hose, which was similar in composition to Zodiac material, digging a 4-inch hole through 1-inch pine, chopping 2 2x4s, and then the knives were lashed between 2 beams halfway up their blades so that a man could do a chin-up on it. Immersion in lacquer thinner for 15 minutes, a 48-hour immersion test in gasoline, and a flame test on the grip. So obviously a very extensive test was done on each of these. I don't know how they come up with the criteria, but it's kind of interesting. So the knives that participated in this were, like I said, kind of the hot knives at the time. There was the Mad Dog Attack 2, which you see here. There was the Mad Dog DSU2, which looks very similar to the serrations that the Attack 2 has, but it runs the full length of the blade. And I'm going to really try not to cut myself, I promise. That's the DSU2. I didn't really care to get one of those whenever I was looking into purchasing a knife because I didn't like full serrations, and since then I've actually moved away from liking serrations at all. I'm just not a big fan of those because they're a pain to sharpen, and I would rather have a full edge on knives that I have. So again, DSU2 and TAC2. Then there was the Mission Knives MPK, which looks eerily similar to the Attack design with this little, I'm not really sure what that's called, but if you look at the MPK, if you search that, Mission Knives MPK, you'll see that it looks very similar to the Mad Dog knife. And then there's the SOG Seal 2000, which this is a Seal pup that I have, but the Seal 2000 looks like just a bigger version of this, and it's actually a massive version of this. And then there was the Buck Nighthawk, which is a production knife of the knife originally entered into the Seal trials, which this is a Buck knife. This is a 184 or a Buckmaster knife. As you can see, it's kind of a Rambo-esque knife that's, I think they started production on the Buckmaster back in 1984 and ended somewhere in 97. And this was the predecessor to the Seal knife trials, so this was issued to the teams at some point. I don't really know the full history of it, and I've tried to do some research at a time, but if any of you guys out there know a little more about that, I'd love to hear about it, because I've really never fully known what was going on with the teams with that knife. But at any rate, there was also the traditional K-bar too. So those were the knives that participated in the trial. One thing that I thought was kind of interesting too in the trial is that they actually, when they lashed those knives, I was going to find this in here. This is all just one big thing that I really encourage you to read this too, because it's pretty cool looking at this stuff. But they did the pull-up test on the knives, which a couple of them snapped. So one was here we go. Each blade was tested by a 140 and 225 pound individual. All blades were able to support 140. The K-bar and MPK blades flexed noticeably with the 140 pound load. After only one chin up with 225, the K-bar bent about 30 degrees and the tang blade shoulder at the tang blade shoulder junction, which is what happens when you don't harden the tang. The buck blade snapped about 2 inches from the back of the tip with 225 pounds on it. The SOG blade bent at about 5 to 10 degrees, 2.5 inches back from the tip with 225 pounds. Would still be serviceable in that condition though. And the MPK flexed rather severely with the 225 pound load, but returned immediately to true. And the Mad Dog blades flexed moderately under the 225 pound load, but returned to true without any damage. So, and it talks about a little bit of a mishap with the DSU2 sliding out momentarily, but it's really a cool test to learn about, and that's what kind of, like I said, sparked my interest in knives kind of back in the day. I grew up wanting to be a SEAL since I was 12, so this was actually my first knife. Back when I was probably 11 years old, I convinced my dad to go to the hardware store and let me pick out a knife, and for some reason I picked out a fillet knife. I didn't do any fishing back then, but this is like a rubber-handled fillet knife, so I've still kept it all these years. You can see where I really haven't used it much, and I think once I realized what I had back then, I kind of graduated to different knives. But so another knife that's kind of rich in history with the teams is the Mark III Mod Zero. This is made by, I think it's been made by a couple of different companies, but I think Ontario makes these right now. This was kind of the first dive knife that I think the teams were issued, if I remember correctly. And then the SRK, which is from Cold Steel, is actually the knife we were issued at Bud's. This is the one we wore on all our dives and things like that we would use, but you never used it because you always had to keep it sharp for for inspection. So before you went on a swim, you stood there with your knife and your CO2 from your actuator on your UDT vest, and you had to get that inspected before a swim. And I remember a fond story of an instructor coming by and not liking me for some reason and taking my knife and just slashing it across a metal post, and I remember my heart just sank because I knew I was going to have to sharpen it later on that night. But the SRK, I've always really liked these knives. We used to actually put petroleum jelly and things like that to protect the blade from saltwater corrosion when we go on dives. And that's another thing to keep in mind with these knives too. A lot of these were designed to be in saltwater environments, some aren't. So take that with a grain of salt. And this is back to the Seal 2000 lookalike, which is the Seal Pup again. This is a more recent one that PDW came out with, Prometheus Design Works. This is their Griffin knife. This is the Strider DUK, I think is what it's called, like a dive utility knife. So that's one I've had for quite a while too. We actually did a paracord wrapping demonstration on that on a previous video, an ITS. This is a Bowden knife, I believe, that was done. This is MT Knives. Friend Patrick over there sent me a prototype of the knife that he did here. This is one my friend Billy Cho made. He's formerly of Rifle Dynamics, so he started kind of making knives on the side, and this is one he engraved a little ITS logo for me. Pretty cool Tano-like blade. And this is one of my favorite knives. This is the Mad Dog Frequent Flyer. It's basically a composite knife that's got no metal signature, hence the word Frequent Flyer. I don't think that he makes them anymore. I think they actually started calling them something different at some point because of 9/11 happening and things like that. But I mean, I've had this almost as long as that attack too. So that was probably, late 90s, early 2000s when I picked those up. The Mora knife is something we carried at ITS for a while. I've always been a pretty big fan of the fact that these had a ferro rod in the butt, you know, and you can spark that like that. I've always really loved the utility of those. Plus, it's a really good stainless blade. It doesn't rust on you, and I really love the striker ability as well. And then I kind of got some folders that I've picked up over the years. I actually started really liking Emerson knives back when Emerson did a collaboration with Benchmade. So that was their original CQ-C7, which is this knife here. So before Emerson was making these himself, he did a collaboration with Benchmade and produced them under Benchmade's name. They used to have the Life Sharp guarantee. I believe it was like the 970 or something. Yeah, I still have a box. So I lost my Emerson CQ-C7 back from the day, but I still have the box. So 970 SBT was the brand that the nomenclature it used to be under. And I remember setting that in a couple of times and actually getting it sharpened for free from Benchmade. But alas, I lost that a long time ago. I can't even remember where it fell out of my pocket, but I was pretty mad about that one, and I've never forgave myself for losing that knife. But at any rate, I picked up another CQ-C7 when Emerson developed the Wave feature. The Wave was kind of something that came around in, I think it was the early 2000s is kind of when the Wave was developed. But the premise behind that is when you have it in a pocket, you can pull the knife to the rear and it actually opens the blade because your pocket catches on that little Wave feature. I really loved it when it came out. I remember being at Bud's when I graduated Hell Week. I actually picked up, gave myself a Commander for graduation from Hell Week. It's got the 2004 date on it, so that's when I got through Hell Week with Class 251 back in the day. But the Commander is a huge knife. It also had the Wave feature, and I mean, I don't carry this anymore. It's just too big to deal with. But then there was also the SOCFK, which is kind of a similar design to the CQ-C7, but you can see that it's a little bit different in the blade profile, just a tad, and then the handle is the big difference on that. But this is kind of a limited release, so this says the year 2000 on it, so this is number 82. I guess they only did a limited run of these. I can't even remember where I picked it up. There was a gear shop out of Virginia Beach that had these. But so now I've kind of transitioned away from the Wave feature. I was at a class with Jeff Gonzalez, and he brought up a really good point about carrying a knife with a Wave on it, is that, you know, when you open this knife and you're in a, defensive situation, your threat's up here, and now your knife blade's way back here, and you're having to, transition this into some kind of defensive position. So it was an interesting point that he brought up. So I'm not completely knocking the Wave. I think it works fantastic, but there's kind of a time and a place for it, I guess. Now I carry the A100. We did a little run of these with Emerson for ITS. Got the little ITS logo on it, but that's the A100 is what I carry on a regular basis now. It doesn't have the Wave either, just because I've been taught some stuff on how to properly open a knife, hip check it, and actually go into some defensive knife work, and I've migrated away from the Wave feature. There's also the Dauntless, the production Dauntless when Tad came out with that. Have one of those, and then I picked up a Winkler folder. So Daniel Winkler came out with his first folder design, and I wanted to check that out. I liked it. I carried it for a while. I think it's a great blade. It's just fairly large compared to the A100, not in size or height, but just actual width. So, and then I have a switchblade. Texas recently passed the, I guess it was a switchblade law, something like that. But I follow knife rights pretty closely. If you're not familiar with kniferights.org, definitely check them out. Pay attention to, they're trying to pass a lot of knife preemption bills. So what that does is it takes the old deprecated knife laws and kind of brings them into the 21st century. So definitely check out Knife Rights. I can't advocate that group more. Doug Ritter is the founder of that organization. He does phenomenal work. He's really been instrumental in getting a lot of old school knife laws repealed and just really getting the state to recognize knife laws as a whole instead of having, individual knife laws depending on what city you go to. So again, this is a switchblade, no practical purposes other than getting in a fight down at your local sock hop. And I've always had one of these, and I think every kid growing up has a little switchblade comb. And then I've always liked butterfly knives, or I don't know how you say it, bollies, but I've always really just enjoyed kind of messing with knives like this. I think if I had a real one that had a sharp blade, I probably wouldn't do this as much, but I always get a kick out of them. Then I kind of thought I was going to get into karambits for a while. This is an Emerson trainer. I just never have really picked up a real karambit, so I just kind of mess around with the trainer every once in a while. I think they're interesting knives, and at any rate, that's what I have. And then this is a little knife that S&S Precision came out with. I think it's called the PS or something like that. But it's a little kind of emergency blade you can clip onto MOLLE webbing. And I feel like I've gone over this somewhere before in gear tasting. And then I think every kid growing up has a little Swiss Army knife, and I've just always loved well, this one has a pen, but my other one has a toothpick and a little tweezers. I always got a kick out of that growing up and having one of these as a kid, so I've always hung on to that. I think one thing I didn't talk about was the Hisatsu. So the Hisatsu was designed by James Williams, and I actually studied under him when I was in San Diego going to Buds. In my downtime when I got injured, I would go up and train with him a little bit. And that was in Sistema that I trained in a little bit with him, and I remember he was just developing this Hisatsu knife, which is a monster in itself. But so the premise behind it is it was designed to penetrate through the clavicle into the aorta, and also through the mandible into the brain. So that's the origin of this knife. I think what does Hisatsu mean again? It was like a finishing move or coup de grace or something like that. So at any rate, that's the Hisatsu. This is made by CRKT. And that is kind of my knife collection. So the original question that Sean had to do with autos, and really the only auto I have is my sock hop knife, that I tuck into my sock, if I'm down there and get into a squabble or something. So I don't really like auto knives too much. I think that I'd rather control the blade opening and be able to, like I said, I've kind of picked up some defensive knife techniques, and I'm not a big fan of just presenting a knife and using the intimidation factor to scare somebody. I don't really like that train of thought. And then one other thing I wanted to mention too was this is a Walmart dollar store knife, and the reason this is in my collection is because I wanted to discuss just have the application for these. So if you're traveling somewhere and you can't take a knife with you, foreign country or even domestically, and you're taking a carry-on, you can't carry a knife, you can always just go down to Walmart and buy a dollar store knife. And honestly, if you had to do something with one of these, you really could. This has still got a lock-back blade function, and while it's not the best, it still would get the job done if you had to use this for defensive purposes. So just a little tip. Hope you enjoyed the knife walkthrough. All right, I'm going to field one more quick question. I know this has been a long gear tasting, so this is from Irrelevant Nonsense on Twitter, who asks, do you use wearables like paracord bracelets or the Leatherman tread or other multi-tools? Not really anymore. I used to wear paracord bracelets before everybody and their mother started wearing them. because I kind of was an early adopter of Serpic's paracord buckle that had a key in it, and you could pull out the handcuff key and use it if you had to. And that was back when paracord bracelets weren't really a dead giveaway for that type of thing, and a dead giveaway for the fact that you're carrying a gun and other things like that. So I have migrated a little bit away from, I guess, the tactical tuxedo look of paracord bracelets, but just, I guess, the tactical look in general. I've kind of, as I've been around this industry for so long, I've kind of migrated away from it, and that's just, it is what it is, and just being honest. So, like I said, I used to wear paracord bracelets all the time. Most of them had the key in it. I had this one given to me after the first Go Ruck ascent. This was a survival straps bracelet that I tried my best to wear, but I really just never liked this huge buckle design that it had on it. I thought it was a little bulky. And, you know, for a long time, too, I used to wear KIA bracelets before we developed our own that we came up with this in memory of our fallen, you know, and had our logo, and we kind of did this joint venture with Hero Bracelets. I had individual bracelets printed with the guys that I knew from the service that passed away or they're killed in combat. So I would cycle those out on my wrist, and I still do every once in a while, but I'm trying to wear a Fitbit as much as I can now. And if I'm wearing a bracelet like this, I'll just take the actual Fitbit device that's in here out, and I'll put it into my pocket. And it still tracks just fine. But that's kind of what I wear now is a Fitbit on my wrist if I'm not wearing a memorial bracelet. And I've tried some other paracord bracelets over the years. This is one from, I think, Snake Doctor. It had a concealable key in a piece of rubber like this, and you just put it together and wear it like that. This one looked a little bit more, this was all Kevlar too, but looked a little less descript than a standard paracord bracelet, which I liked. But yeah, that's my short answer, I guess, in long-winded format is no, I wear a Fitbit or a memorial bracelet these days. Thanks. All right, thanks for watching Gear Tasting. Hope you enjoyed this episode. Make sure if you like Gear Tasting, you consider supporting with our Crew Leader membership. It allows us to give you back something in return for your hard-earned dollars supporting us through our membership. Also, make sure you use the pound tag Gear Tasting on any of the social media outlets. If you have a question, we will find them and get them answered on the show. Thanks again.